Welcome to Texas 2036's virtual series, Straight Talk Texas, where you have a front row seat to conversations on topics important to our future. My name is Enisha Shropshire, Director of Board and External Affairs here at Texas 2036. Joining us today is Texas 2036 board member Wynn Rosser, who is President and CEO of the T.L.L. Temple Foundation in Lufkin, Texas, a member and key funder of the Texas Rural Funders Collaborative, primarily focusing their funding on broadband. Wynn and Texas 2036 President and CEO Margaret Spellings will have a conversation on the challenges uniquely experienced in our rural community, particularly around broadband internet access. Margaret, over to you.
Thanks, Anisha, and thanks for everything you're doing to promote this series. Wynn, terrific to be with you as always. I know you are drinking from the fire hose out there, given the needs of the time and your leadership at the Temple Foundation and all the work that you do. So thank you for taking time to be with us. And we want to really hit on a couple of things today. First of all, we are seeing, and certainly this is true in education, which I know a little about how dramatically we have switched to working and learning at home. And clearly there are some interesting dynamics about that, but one of the things that's clearly foundational is you got to have broadband. You've got to have technological capability that can make those things happen. Talk about the gaps in rural Texas. Help educate our fellow Texans about what's at issue there.
Well, thank you, Margaret, first for having me and for launching this series of virtual conversations. I think it's incredibly important always to think about the situation that our state finds itself in, and the situation we're in right now certainly is very dramatic, challenging times, but it's really exposing gaps that we already knew were there. Gaps that maybe we thought were cracks are actually canyons. We already live in a area of the state and the country that had higher than the state average and national average of food insecurity and poverty. So we already knew those were issues. They're more extreme now and more urgent now. Broadband is another one of those areas. We've been talking about rural broadband for a decade, 2 decades. Of course, what broadband is, those speed requirements have crept up. Now we talk about 25 megabits, 25 down, 3 up. But most of the state doesn't have 25.3. And it's the minimal requirement now to participate in the 21st century. And the work from home movement over the last month or so, the shift of 5.4 million Texas children from public schools to online learning is really showing the challenges that we have. But it's not just rural. LaTanya Goffney, Dr. Goffney, the superintendent of Aldine ISD that surrounds Bush Intercontinental Airport in Houston, was on a Texas Tribune talk now a week before last, talking about her 67,000 students, 40% of whom have no access to the internet and no device. So the solution at Aldine is to issue a Chromebook and a hotspot. And that will work in an urban environment where you've got dense cell signals. In the piney woods of East Texas or the plains of West Texas, hotspots aren't as much a solution. Also, you can't write a 12-page paper on a smartphone.
Right.
We've been talking about mobile devices as the great equalizer in the digital divide. Well, some of the things that we're expecting our students to do right now, mobile devices aren't the answer. You really do need broadband, and you need a device like a Chromebook or another type of PC or MacBook to do the work. And so it's about the devices. It's about is access to the internet there physically? Does the line run in front of your home? Can you afford it? And do you appreciate its functions? Do you know how to use it so you can fully participate in this 21st century that we're all experiencing now, where online is more important than ever?
Talk about the implications for health and healthcare, telemedicine, and the gaps there.
So I think the movement that the state and federal governments have made recently to increase access to telemedicine is a good move. Again, it's something that we needed 3 months ago. We need it more now. The doctor to patient interactions often can be achieved on a cellular device, on a mobile device. The implications we see our specialty care in hospitals, and moving medical records. And so you can't move digital medical images over cellular data. You need a fiber connection, a high-speed connection to do that. And some of the specialty care that's necessary with the monitoring moves large amounts of data back and forth. So a remote physician can monitor a patient's real-time health information. We've actually are working right now with the Texas Organization of Rural Clinics and Hospitals, TORCH, on a 3-site grant to increase the access to telemedicine. So telemedicine isn't just the devices, it's also, so one of the practices that I've learned about has 180 doctors. And each one of those doctors has to be individually credentialed by each hospital that uses their platform. Yeah. And so it's layers of things that have to be worked out so that a hospital or a community can take advantage again of the technology. And so part of this grant is about, one, how do you use it in the hospital? How does a nurse access the technology to put the card in front of the patient to connect to the remote physician? But it's also just the process and the paperwork and the bureaucracy to make sure that the physicians can actually do their work through credentialing.
And in both instances, both in education and health, I mean, what are reasonable timelines to think about this? I mean, we've been talking about online education for 25 years and made more progress in the last 3 weeks than we did in the previous 25 years. But, some of this is really going to be challenged by, as you say, the bureaucracy and those things like that. I mean, what are reasonable time horizons? I mean, if we have another outbreak in the fall, are we going to be ready to use these tools more effectively in that kind of horizon, or how long is it going to take?
The reality in rural areas where you do not have the infrastructure you need to deliver 25/3, we're talking years probably to build that out. Now, districts are doing things like creating hotspots on buses where they park a bus and the children can come to the parking lot. Community colleges in our area that serve large numbers of rural students have turned their entire parking lots into hotspots.
Right.
But again, you have to leave your home to access that. Most of the 12-county region that I'm sitting in now, the Deep East Texas Council of Governments, most residents have no more than 10-1.
Yeah.
If you think about the amount of data that moves now on websites, you pull up a website and the amount of time it takes to load on a 10-1 connection versus a 100 megabit connection, all of the platforms are designed with an urban-centric view. They aren't designed for those slower speeds. And more the answer, I was at Texas A&M for 14 years, and even back in the early 2000s when I was there, and as I left that to enter philanthropy, the answer was it's online. We no longer printed catalogs; they were online. So we expect everyone to find the information they need to learn about whatever it is they're interested in, either it's an interest or a need. We expect them to go online to do that. And if the websites load graphics and music and all the really cool stuff that makes them engaging, that makes them even harder to reach for a rural audience.
Yeah. I think people don't understand city slickers. They wonder, well, then why do people live out there if it's so hard to get health and get education and whatnot? And I'm going to give you an opportunity to do an infomercial for our part of the state, your part of the state out there. And the other thing I think people don't understand, and we certainly are beating the drum about this at Texas 2036, is, it's 3 million plus Texans that live in rural Texas, more than 18 states in our country. So it's not a small number of folks. But give me your infomercial on living in East Texas and why it's attractive, or the advantages. You've talked about some of the disadvantages.
Well, you're spot on. It's too many people to ignore or overlook, or leave behind. And the challenges with broadband are, and the reasons that we need broadband are no different than the reasons we needed electricity in the early 1900s. So I tell people my mother grew up in a home without running water, just a little bit north of Austin in the Salado area, but they had electricity in the mid-1900s, 1950s. And so by that point, plumbing was mainstream, but living in a rural area, didn't have a toilet, but they did have electricity. And so the leadership we need now is no different than what we needed between President Roosevelt and President Johnson to ensure that rural residents have access to the utilities they need to fully participate in society. We have 5.7 million people, residents in the 24 counties that we claim as our service area. That includes Harris County. When you take Harris County out, it's 1.2 million. And so you have 1.2 million people living primarily in 23 rural counties. It's too many to overlook and too many to leave behind. The advantages of living in rural America, rural Texas, rural East Texas, it's a great quality of life. There are amazing people in these rural communities. A couple of weeks ago, we hosted an emergency food box delivery. And in 2 days' notice, we got 20 volunteers. Even amongst all the concerns and fears over individual health, you put out a call and leaders show up. And in that 5 hours of food distribution over 2 days, we delivered 2,200 boxes and 18,000 pounds of chicken, and that's more than 50,000 individual meals. And so you have a great community spirit. We needed a truck to keep the chicken refrigerated. Well, the local produce company, food distributor, provided a truck. Local corporation, Pilgrim's Pride, provided the chicken. So you have that kind of responsiveness from community leaders because we live here ourselves. And these are our neighbors that we care for. There's low crime. There's clean air. There's no traffic. I live about 20 miles from our office. It takes me 22 minutes to get here. There's not a stoplight or a stop sign in between me and the gate to our house. But, so I hear this occasionally. So why do you choose to live there? Well, my wife and I, we've chosen to raise our family in a rural area like we were raised. But, the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds, the 5-year-olds, the 12-year-olds, Margaret, they didn't choose to live here. They live here because this is where their family lives, where their family maybe has lived for generations. And when I hear people say, well, you've made a choice, well, we need to realize that a lot of the residents in rural Texas or rural America don't have a choice. It's family land. It's the home they've lived on, or the land they've lived on for generations. It's where they do make their living. And
yeah, no, I totally get it. And the other thing is we're glad that somebody's living out there raising chickens and providing food and fiber and energy and oranges and you name it for those of us who live in cities. So it's an integral part of our economy and the culture and fabric of our state. And as you say, many millions of people. Talk about, as we head into a legislative session in times of crisis and the choices that are going to have to be made. What's your advice to the legislature on how to set priorities around this? Because there's so many needs right now. And as you're well aware, we just passed the big education reform bill. People are hopeful that those things can stick, but wow, it's going to be a tough hand to play next session.
Yeah, I've been telling people that whether it's an individual philanthropic organization like ours or the state leaders, they're going to be in a position where they have to choose between right and right, and good and good.
Exactly. Great way to say it.
The way we're thinking about the decisions we're making right now as a foundation are what are the things that have been priorities to us always. Food insecurity, health, mental health, education, good jobs. And so we're trying to make investments today through this current reality that will ensure the organizations and the agencies that we work with are in solid shape coming out of it so they can continue to execute their missions. Broadband is a great example of something that we've been focused on for several years. And so we're in an upcoming board meeting in the next couple of weeks. We hope to support the DETCOG region to do a network design so that they can be competitive for federal funding when it becomes available to continue the build out of broadband in rural Texas. That's something that we needed to do 3 months ago. It's something we need to do even more now. So I guess my advice to state leaders, the investment in Texas public schools through House Bill 3 was essential last session. It's more essential this session. When you look at most Texas kids live in poverty. The best way out of poverty is through an education and a job. The Texas miracle economy has not benefited most Texans. And if we want those young Texans to be able to fully participate in the 21st century economy, we have to make sure they're trained for the jobs that will actually exist. The state's higher education plan, 60 by 30, is a good one. We've got to make sure more young Texans actually finish the credentials they need to achieve the goals of that plan. And largely, I think we can do that by better investing in the career technical education programs at high school, make sure students have access to the credentials they need where they can graduate on a Friday and go to work on a Monday in a high wage, high skill, high demand job. We've got a lot of those in Texas, but we bring people in from out of state to take jobs that Texans aren't prepared for because we're not investing in our own young people. And there are a lot of, it's not just the responsibility of the schools. There are a lot of challenges to young people in communities, and we need to think about it beyond just the school and beyond just the teachers. And the teachers are heroes. My dad taught 34 years, believe in the work of individual teachers, but the systems have to be shaped differently. And perhaps this is a moment where we're significantly disrupting those systems that we can think about. How do we build something now that's better than what we had? I listened to Commissioner Morath and Commissioner Keller talk yesterday about the kind of changes they see going on in the educational ecosystem. I think there's some real possibilities for doing that. So I guess my advice would be to continue to invest in the things that have always been priorities that are even more important now. And perhaps we have an understanding of the urgency of those priorities now that we didn't have previously.
The other thing that's exciting is, and thank you for your service to Texas 2036, is, data, as we watch the COVID data roll out and there are some conflicting messages and confusion and whatnot, I think we're all understanding that, man, we've got to be working from a fact base that we can count on. And so the data that we've assembled is through Texas 2036 is going to be critically important and smoke out the kinds of things that you just mentioned, that when we stop investing in schools and in young people, it's, maybe penny wise and pound foolish, because then we can't grow the economy and so on. So we're very bullish on what the opportunity can mean for Texas 2036 as we plan for the future. And we've just got a few more minutes. Give me your final thoughts on what you'd want Texans to understand about those acute needs around broadband, and in particular in the eastern part of our state, as we head and plan for the future.
So if you're interested in the subject of broadband and rural broadband, I'd point you to Connected Nation Texas.
Yeah.
They're the organization that's doing the work funded by the Texas Rural Funders Collaborative to better understand where broadband speeds actually can be verified. From provider data to crowdsourcing. And so you can search for Connected Nation Texas maps, and it will take you to a page where you can get a county by county map of the provider reported data for broadband speeds at 10, 25, 50, and 100 megabits. That's the first place I would point people for a comprehensive view of what's available in Texas. It's stunning. At the 25.3 or higher speeds, it's the I-35 corridor from the Oklahoma border all the way down to the Rio Grande Valley. You get off that corridor, the speeds drop substantially, and the more rural you get, the less access you have. Here in rural East Texas, the 12-county DETCOG region did a feasibility study to look at what it would take to build out a 12-county broadband network. We know that rural East Texans pay 400% more per megabit than do residents of Dallas-Fort Worth for less reliable, lower speed connections. We know the connection speeds are lower here. Like I said, about most of DETCOG only has 10 megabits if they have that. We know that it means jobs. So over a 10-year period, the economic impact is in the billions with 10,000 jobs added. So I think there is a real opportunity for people to return to rural areas, to live and work remotely, to connect to the 21st century economy and the 21st century workforce if the infrastructure is here. I'm talking to a lot of friends who were raised in small towns and rural communities like I was, who are thinking, wow, that rural lifestyle looks a whole lot better now if I can connect. I think that's the question. Can we help more Texans connect?
Well, Wynn, let me just say that you can count on Texas 2036 to be rock solidly in support of this broadband development as we head into the legislature. And I think, 6 months ago, if you had asked me, what are Texans concerned about, I would have said congestion. No one is concerned about that now. Everyone is concerned about broadband, and you have been such a tremendous leader through Connected Nation. They're a partner with us as well. And we ought to go down there and make the case, because it's going to be critically important for the future of our state. So with that, I will turn back to Inisha to close us out and to thank you, Wynn, for all you do for Texas broadly and for East Texas in particular. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Margaret. Appreciate your leadership.
Enisha?
Thank you also, Wynn, and thank you, Margaret, for leading the discussion. And thank you all for watching Straight Talk Texas. If you have any questions or feedback, we want to hear from you. Email us at straighttalk@texas2036.org. Also sign up to receive our emails and our social media handles. Visit us at texas2036.org for more information. Until next time, wishing you and your family well.